First off, I just want to thank the Air Force Academy for having me and inviting me out for a speaker, and anybody that was a part of that. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be out here and to speak to you all, the upcoming leaders of this country, those of you that have served, and those of you that are serving as we speak. Thank you so much for what you guys do. I grew up here in eastern Colorado, about 2 hours from here, and that sense of service was something that was always kind of just part of us. I had a grandfather that served in World War II. He was a tank commander, served in North Africa, then was back with Patton going across Europe, had 5 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star and a Bronze Star. So he was my hero. I had 3 uncles that served in Vietnam, 2 in the Navy, 1 in the Marine Corps. So when I got ready to graduate high school, I knew I wasn't going to go to college. My path was either going to be rodeoing, working on a ranch, or going into the military. And so I was walking down the hall with one of my best friends getting ready to go to math class, and he started walking past the classroom, and I'm like, so where are you going? He says, well, I'm going to go talk to the recruiter. And I'm like, so you're getting out of math class for that? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, I'm joining you. That's probably also why I joined the Marine Corps. It says a little bit about me, right? But, 10 days after I graduated high school, I was in boot camp in San Diego. I served 12 years in the Marine Corps, various jobs. I finished up as an interrogator translator. In 1996 is when I got out. I speak Persian Farsi as a second language. And I got to serve in a lot of different places and a lot of different jobs while I was in the service, while I was in the Marine Corps, and got to travel the world and meet a lot of wonderful people that made great impacts on my life. And that training is what took me to my next level, and I was a deputy sheriff up here in Teller County, just east of west of El Paso County, and served about 3 years there. Good portion of that, I was a forensic interviewer of children, worked on crimes against children, left that and became a chief of police down in Fowler, Colorado, near where I grew up. So having that sense of service and sense of doing something for the community has always been there. Well, come 9/11, it's the date that changed my life, both the one in 2001 and the one in 2012. That's when I knew I had to get back in and help this country and serve this country, and started working as a private security contractor. And I started out working in Iraq, and I was in Iraq in 2004 till 2009, 2010, and every year I served about 6 months to 9 months overseas. That ended up gearing me for my next job, and my next job was with the CIA. Everybody knows that's right, the Culinary Institute of America. Not that other one, no. But it was where I wanted to go and where I wanted to work. And my job there was a security guard, or a personal protection detail. And I worked for a group that was called GRS, which is Global Response Staff. And our job was to protect CIA case officers in some of the worst places of the world. I kind of joke about it. If the country ends in Stan, I've probably been in that country. Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan. I mean, any of those, that's probably where I've been. But that ended up taking me to Benghazi in July of September 2012. And I had been there about 45 days come 9/11. And Benghazi, to kind of paint the story, I didn't feel that was the most dangerous place I'd ever been. The people, the average citizen there, they loved the fact that the Westerners, the Western countries, had helped them get rid of Gaddafi. Because they wanted the same thing that most of us want. They want to be able to send their kids to school without getting blown up or shot. They want to be able to work, get an education, and they don't want the government sticking their hand in their back pocket, taking 2/3 of what they make every day. That's pretty much for me, that's what boils down what we want in life. If you have that, everything after that's pretty much gravy, right? Well, we got to learn the city, and my job was to know every back alley, how to get around that city and that country, just as if it was my own. Well, that led up to September 11th, and the ambassador came in the day before, Ambassador Chris Stevens. And the reason he came in is we had a pilot from 2011 when we were helping overthrow Gaddafi. There was a Air Force pilot that got shot down. And there was a local Libyan that lived in Benghazi that had found him and hid him out from the bad guys until he could get to U.S. personnel. And so the ambassador wanted to come down. That guy had a school, and he was opening an English-speaking wing of that school to teach the kids of Benghazi to speak English. And the ambassador was coming down to honor him for saving that American's life to do a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Well, the thing with Benghazi is after the overthrow of Gaddafi, there was roughly 10 or 15 militias that kind of took over the city. There really wasn't any government infrastructure. We had one militia that controlled the airport, and they taxed anything that came in and out of there. Another one controlled the seaport. They taxed anything that came across there. Another one, overland traffic. There was another militia that went out and bought a bunch of cars, painted them like police cars, and wanted to enforce their idea of, one, Sharia law, two, exploiting the public because they would strong-arm the public to pay for that security. And there we had the consulate was about 8 acres to kind of paint that picture. And they had 5 diplomatic security officers on 8 acres to protect the ambassador. Now, anybody who's been in the military probably more than 3 days realizes that 5 guys to protect 8 acres is way inadequate. Part of that comes from, we wanted, as a foreign policy, we wanted to let the Libyans think that they were doing that. We didn't want it to seem like America was dictating what they do in their country. We didn't want that big footprint. They wanted to be a little bit more low-key. About a mile from there, as the crow flies, is the Annex, and that's where we had our cooking school, the Culinary Institute of America. That's where the CIA was at. Our facility was about the size of a football field, and there were 6 security guards or 6 guys from GRS there, and we had about 20 some odd people that we were protecting there. And that's either case officers. I mean, we have our own cooks, our own maintenance guys, and all that, so we can have everything internal. Well, September 11th comes around, and we weren't going to do any movement that day. Well, we ended up having, me and a female case officer had to, I'll call it a dinner date. We had a dinner date with a local Libyan couple, and we had left the compound about 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. Got over, we sat down, had dinner with them, and about 9:30, I get a phone call from Tyrone Woods. Tyrone is one of my teammates with GRS. He was our team leader. Tyrone says, "Hey, Oz, you need to get back to the Annex, stay away from the consulate, and get here as soon as you can." He's on a cell phone, so it's open source. He's not going to talk too much about anything else, details, because anybody could be intercepting and listening in on us. So I gather up the female case officer, I get her in the car, and that's when we're heading back. And we have encrypted communications in the car. So I turn it on, and that's when I hear what's going on over at the consulate, because we share communications with them. Well, what you're hearing is gunfire, explosions, and after about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I hear one of the State Department guys come over the radio, and he says, "If you don't get here now, we're going to all die." Now, there was a few expletives in there too. You could hear the panic and the fear in his voice. I mean, what we found out is they had gotten overran by 40 armed insurgents. They did their job as they were trained to do their job. They take the ambassador, put him in a safe room. They gather up their guns and then try to protect and take back their compound. Well, there was 40 guys that took over the compound. They got all separated in getting their equipment, and they got trapped in their own safe rooms in their rooms, in their actual residences, because there was about 5 different buildings on that compound. They couldn't get out. The only cavalry around, because we're in Benghazi, is us over at the Annex. Now, our job wasn't to do anything for the State Department, but we knew that they had inadequate training. We knew that they didn't have enough experience, and they didn't have enough guys there. So we had told them long before, if anything happens, you guys call us. We'll be there for you. And that all kind of goes back to that brotherhood in arms that we have. I mean, I'm not going to let an American die if I can make a difference in that person's life and whether or not they live or not. And we had all kind of agreed on that ahead of time. So when they came across with that phone call saying, "Hey, we need help," The only people that were there was us. The problem that we had is, we work for the CIA, a covert base in the middle of a country, a foreign country that doesn't know that we're there. Well, when we first got the call, we were hoping, because the State Department had an agreement with one of the militias that was called February 17th Martyrs Brigade. And that group was kind of the umbrella group that helped overthrow Gaddafi. All the other militias came underneath during the overthrow. Well, like anything, you get rid of that one bad guy, now all those factions are kind of fighting for control over Benghazi and the Libya area. And they wouldn't respond. Feb 17th Brigade would not respond to help the ambassador. We were ready, our guys, while I'm driving back, the rest of the team gets ready. They're sitting there going up to Bob, and Bob's our chief of base. They go up to Bob and say, hey, Bob, we're ready to go. We're going to go get eyes on so we can at least feed you back some intel from an American source instead of having to depend on a third country national or a local national. Bob said, no, you need to stand down. You need to wait. And at first, okay, maybe we thought that's not a bad decision. He's trying to gather up as much information as he can to make his decisions. Well, after about 10 minutes, we go back up to him. Tig goes up to him and says, hey, we need to get going now because we're going to lose the initiative. Now we're going to be going onto a compound that is, instead of guys that are disorganized in the initial phases of an attack, have had time to establish defensive positions, have gotten ready to repel any assault that's going to be coming from any other help. Bob said, no, you need to wait. Well, what I didn't know is when that guy came over the radio from State Department and said, if you don't get here now, we're all going to die. Tig, Tyrone, Jack, DB, Tonto said, heck with what Bob had to say. We got Americans who are going to die. We can make a difference, and left. So they headed out. They got over there. It was about a mile and a half if you had the route that they took. They get over there. They couldn't get right into the compound. They got within 300 yards. And what did they encounter? Guys that had been set up down the road. And we called it, the Consulate Alley is the road that ran in front of it. And the road that they came down is called Gunfighter. And Gunfighter is a code word we give the road. And we did that because we'd gotten into a gunfight there before. But they ran into guys with RPGs and AK-47s and PKMs. And they're receiving gunfire coming down from in front of the consulate. So Tig jumps out. He has a 40-millimeter grenade launcher and launches 3 grenades and lands right in front of the consulate and pretty much dispersed all the guys that were shooting at him. The decision was made that 3 guys were going to move down the main alleyway. 2 more, which was Tonto and DB, moved around into a higher elevated position in a building to provide cover fire as the other 3 moved in. So Jack and Tyrone and Tig moved down the front down that roadway to the consulate. And as they come through the front gate, what they are faced with is 40 armed insurgents. You got a building to your right that's engulfed in flames, and directly in front of them, about 45 yards in front of them, was the ambassador's residence, just totally engulfed in flames, smoke billowing out of every window and out of part of the rooftop. And you've got 3 guys coming on. Well, the reason they were able to push off 40 armed insurgents is because of 3 things: superior training and tactics, element of surprise, and sheer violence of action. When the guys to their left and right, the bad guys to the left and right of the attackers start seeing their buddies getting shot in the head, it changes their will to stay in the fight. They all pulled back and went out the back gate. While that went on, Tonto and DB had been able to make their way around and come in to help facilitate searching for the ambassador, securing the site, and gathering up all sensitive material that we didn't want to leave behind. And we're getting on it. It's about 10:15. Jack, immediately when he goes up, the State Department guys are making it out of there. They pull out Sean Smith's body. Sean Smith had died of smoke inhalation. While they're doing that, they're going to try to revive him. Tyrone and Tig start going inside the ambassador's residence, because that's the only person that we don't have an account on, is where the ambassador is. Last known position was he was in one of the back bedrooms, which was the safe room by the bathroom. Well, the building, now it had probably 15-foot, 20-foot ceilings, but everything from there to about 3 foot above the ground was covered in smoke, was filled with smoke and that hot gas. You got to get on your hands and knees and crawl to be able to find anything or to be able to see, because you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, couldn't see the end of the muzzle of your rifle. Well, we didn't have any firefighting equipment, any SCBAs or any gas masks or anything like that. So what did Tig and Tyrone do? They held their breath, would go in as far as they could, and then search as much as they could, then come back out, catch another breath, go back in. Over the next hour and a half, they probably went in and out of this building 10 to 12 different times looking for the ambassador, checking a different room, getting in as far as they could. The last time they were coming out, they got separated. And Tig came out and Tyrone was left inside. He got lost in the smoke. And Tig hears him yelling, if you don't, Tig, where you at? Well, Tig, with total no concern for his own safety, having just been holding his breath for as long as he could, comes out, takes a gasp of breath and goes back in, and he finds Tyrone. Now later in the morning before the final attack at the annex, me and Tyrone up on the rooftop, he'd explained how Tig had saved his life because he couldn't hold his breath any longer. Had Tig not come back and got him, he would have been dead over at the consulate. Well, he gets him pulled out, and while he's doing that, a counter assault starts happening from the back gate. A bunch of the insurgents had started up again, gathered up about 50, 60 guys, and they're going to try to take the compound back. They realized that the force wasn't as big as what they thought. Well, there was one guy kind of leading the attack, and he has an RPG, and he's stepping out into the gate, the back gate to the consulate. He'd step out behind cover, and he'd fire an RPG, and he'd step back, he'd load back up, and then he'd get ready to step back out and fire another one. Well, the third time he steps out and starts to fire, Tig had made his way up on the rooftop, and right as that guy come out to shoot that third RPG, or as he shot that third RPG, Tig let go about 10 rounds. Most of them hitting the guy. And now, Tig didn't realize this, and most people didn't until after, when we saw some of the overhead footage. We did have a drone overhead, and I got to see that when I got out of the hospital in mid-October. And what you saw was, you could see the guy get hit. The RPG had already left the tube, and it was basically heading directly towards Tig. And all of a sudden, about halfway there, you could see some of the tracer rounds impact that RPG. And it turns and goes off into the right. Now, I don't know what people think about their faith in who we had there that night, but I can tell you, if you don't have a relationship with God, you probably haven't been shot at enough. It'll change your faith. It'll change your relationship. Trust me. Well, we had somebody else helping us out that night. We had a 7th member of our team, and thank goodness we did, because a lot of things happened that night that are unexplainable why 6 guys were able to do what they did. Well, when that guy got killed, shooting that RPG, it took the air out of that counter assault, and they just pulled back because everybody else started shooting down that way as guys were trying to come through. The RPG was their main force, hoping they could destroy the main element, our main element. Well, took the air out of that, stopped that. Now the decision had to make, it's getting on about 12 o'clock. The decision had to be made, do 5 guys, because I'm not over there. I'm back at the annex now, taking care of security there, protecting the 20-odd people that were there. I'm controlling that. The rest of the guys had to make the decision, do we stay here, continue searching for the ambassador who we've been searching for an hour and a half. We're not confirmed on his location because he could have been taken out of there before we got there. He might have been kidnapped. No one that was there could give us positive information other than one of the State Department guys, because that was with the ambassador, got separated and had been separated from him for about 30 minutes. So there's no telling what happened during that time. Now 5 guys trying to defend an 8-acre compound with an unknown enemy force, or falling back to the annex where we knew we had 20 other people that we had to protect, and that decision had to be made. So that's what happened. And when that happened, the catalyst to it was one of our informants came on and said there's 100 more people mounting outside for another counter assault. So we had to get out of there. The State Department guys, they sent them out And they told him, make sure you turn left when you go out of the front gate. Because if you turn right, 3 houses down, there was an Al-Qaeda safe house, which is where the attack generated from, most likely. Well, and here it comes to that thing of doing the same thing. How many of you drive to work or come to school or drive to your place of employment the same way every day? Probably most everybody does. And you do it without thinking. You do it without thinking because it's the path of least resistance. You got other things on your mind, and that's how you operate, and you become a pattern. Well, the State Department guys, when they left the consulate, every day, if they were going somewhere, or if they came over to the annex, they would go out and turn right. That's how they always did it on a regular day. So now, when their minds are overcome with stress, anxiety, and fear, guess what they do? No matter what you tell them, they still do the same thing. They went out and turned right. And when they did, they drove into another ambush. And they got ambushed on the way back over to the annex. Now, thank goodness they were in a level 6 armored Toyota Land Cruiser. That thing can take a lot of hits. Well, when they pulled up to the annex, the front windshield had probably 25 bullet holes in it. Up and down each side had 30 or 40 bullet holes. All the tires were shot out. Luckily, none of them penetrated and hurt anybody on the inside. But when they showed up at the annex, I meet them, and they're pretty much in that position of fight or flight. And their brains have pretty much shut down because of the amount of adrenaline that's being pumped through their body. And at this point, I've got to make them combat effective. I need guys to do something. And the way I do that, and the way I've always done that, is I give them a specific task. Because I need to change their brain from what they just went through to the importance of what they've got to do now. And I direct each one of them specifically on what I need them to do and where I need them to do it, on what rooftop, so we have security, because you know the bad guys are coming over afterwards. So I got each one of them up on a rooftop, except for the team leader and Scott Wickland. Scott had been in with the ambassador, and he was pretty much taken out because of the smoke inhalation. He was not combat effective. So I got him inside our main building, which was what I call Building C, which was our TOC, our Tactical Operations Center. And his team leader went in there. Well, while we're doing this, the rest of the team, the GRS team, ended up leaving. And they went out, took a left, came a roundabout way, unopposed, and made it back to the annex. Well, in the Marine Corps, I used to have this thing, I call it my 6 Ps. It's prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Okay? For us at GRS, on our days that we weren't doing something, or our downtime, what we would do is one of us would draw a map up of our compound and of the area. We'd take a map and we would game an attack. One of us would have to come up with how we would attack the consulate or the annex. The rest of us would come up how we would defend it. And through that, we'd pretty much gone over the last 45 days I'd been there, about every scenario you could think of, everything from a big attack like we ended up having to a lone guy coming over the wall in the middle of the night. Things like that. So, and from our talking about it and going through it and training ourselves on what to do, everybody knew what they were going to do that night. We didn't have to talk about it again. No one had to worry about where they were going to go. All they did was when they got there, they said, Oz, where do you got guys? I'm like, I've got one here, here, and here. And so they just filled in where they needed to. And prior to September 11th, a month or so ahead of time, we had pre-arranged and pre-placed ammo cans, 50 cal ammo cans full of M16 magazines in various fighting positions. And we did that so as if you were there by yourself or there's not as big a force defending, you can move from position to position and not have to worry about carrying ammo, not have to worry about carrying water, because we had water pre-staged. So we were ready to make yourself look like a bigger target than what you were. You could maneuver, you could do your fire and maneuver. And that's what we did that night. I ended up in the northeast corner. Tonto and DB were on Building B, and they were providing cover to the east. The rest of the guys filled in on the other parts of the perimeter, and Tig has been making his way over to my location. And as he's coming over, we had started seeing movement out on our eastern flank. And you could see him coming up. Well, there'd been a house over there that some civilians lived in, so we didn't want to engage if we didn't have to, and we weren't confirmed that they were the friendlies or enemies. Because of them, we had civilians that could be living in the impact area. Well, as they were starting to move up, we start seeing guns, and RPG flies over our head. At the same time, I see something with sparks come flying over the wall. It lands in between me and Tig as he's walking up. He's probably 15 yards from me. It lands in between us and it explodes. It was an IED. Luckily, it didn't have any shrapnel. It went off, and that's when we opened fire on them. And there was about 15 to 20 guys attacking us. Now, we had NVGs, night vision goggles. We could see through the night. We had infrared lasers on all our weapons, so we could identify targets. Each of us could see where the others were shooting. And Tig comes running up. He's shooting right beside me, and we've got him in a pretty good crossfire. I mean, not to be too crass about it, but I grew up out east shooting prairie dogs, and it was a lot like that. You'd shoot one, he'd go down, his buddy comes up to take his spot, you take that one down. Well, after about 5 to 7 minutes, they decided that the sheepdog guard in this compound had a few more teeth in it than what happened over at the consulate. So they pulled back. They drug their dead and their wounded out and pulled back. Well, now we're feeling pretty good because, we had been over to the consulate, pushed off 40 armed insurgents. We were able to locate everybody but the ambassador, repel a counter assault, make their way back. We've been fired upon, and all of us don't have any major injuries. I think Tig got hit in the side, and he was kind of whining from a ricochet. Didn't penetrate the skin. He was kind of whining a little bit. We'd gotten the wall in front of us, and the lights that were our floodlights had gotten shot, so you got a little bit of debris or glass in your face, a few cuts on your face, but nothing major. So we're thinking we're doing good. And about this time, we also get a notification that Glenn Doherty, or Bub, his call sign's Bub, he was the team leader of our GRS team in Tripoli. They'd been able to gather up an aircraft, make their way down to Benghazi airport. It was a private civilian plane. It was kind of like a commuter jet that runs back and forth from Springs to Denver. Fairly big size, but it couldn't carry everybody if we had to get everybody out. So the plan was get all the non-essential or the non-shooters out, and then the rest of us, when Glenn's team came in, they were going to take all of them out. Our team was going to stay and kind of hold the Alamo. And if we had to make our way and fight our way out after that, then we had planned for that as well. Well, the downside to that is no one on Glenn's team had ever been to Benghazi. And imagine landing in a foreign airport in a private plane with a bunch of guns and a bag full of money. You think TSA security is bad, right? So, and remember that militia that's controlling the airport. That militia knows what's going on over at ours. They're communicating. They know what's going on at our place. And they're thinking, hey, this is a great plan, or this is a great time for us to get as many $100 bills out of that bag. So Glenn's team has to negotiate with them and basically bribe them to get vehicles and a guide to take them to the annex so they can come to us. While that's going on, we start seeing movement again on our eastern and our northern flanks. That's all zombie land out there. And again, this time they're coming back at us. This time they're coming at us with about 40 guys, 30, 40 guys, something like that. And, again, we're seeing them move up on us. And as they're getting right to that position of where they would get into our floodlights, a car comes streaming out of the darkness. And our back gate is on the eastern side. And we had the Jersey barriers, the cement highway dividers. We had those out there, and that's kind of what we used to stop anything from getting to our back gate. Well, that car skids to a stop, almost hitting that. Guy jumps out, and I see him out of the corner of my eye. He's got his arm back like he's getting ready to throw something. So I put about 3 rounds into him. He falls like a sack of potatoes, and what he was throwing was another IED trying to hit our back gate to breach our wall. It lands short. Well, Tonto and DB and Tig open up. They open up on us, and we're back into another firefight. Now, this one lasted a little bit longer. It was probably closer to 20 minutes. And in the middle of this, Bob, our chief of base, comes over and says, hey, guys, February 17th says you're firing at them. And Tig comes over the radio and says, well, why don't you tell them to quit shooting at us, and then we can quit shooting at them. Bob, in his infinite wisdom, says, it's okay, you guys keep shooting at them. Like we were going to ask permission for that one, right? So about 20 minutes, we end that one. And now we're really feeling good. We did get a call from a phone that was the ambassador had, his body, or he was at the hospital. So there was some discussion on whether or not we were going to go over to the hospital and take and recover the ambassador, because we didn't know if he was alive or dead. What we did is, because my first thought was this was a hoax and they were just trying to get us out of our defensive positions so they could get us out in their territory instead of from reinforced defensive positions and where we have our supplies and ammo. So we sent a source over to double check. What we found out is the ambassador's body was there, but he was deceased. We also found out that Ansar al-Sharia, the militia that was attacking us, had taken over the hospital because of all their dead and wounded. They'd taken pretty much over, taken over every bed there. The numbers they said were somewhere around 200, 300, 200 dead, and a bunch of, they didn't say how many wounded, but you can figure probably 2/3 more than that. Glenn's team ended up coming into us. It's getting on about 5 o'clock, getting 4:30, 4:45. Glenn's team shows up because they were finally able to get bribe those guys into giving them vehicles. And as they pull up, they get out, about 7, 8 guys. They all come in. All of them go into our tactical operations center except for one, and that was Glenn. Glenn was a former sniper in the Navy SEALs. I didn't know him personally, but I knew his reputation, and he kind of had that reputation. If there was a gunfight going on, he wanted to get in it. So instead of going in the building, he came up on top of the rooftop. I had moved from my position up to where Tyrone was on Building C. And there was Dave, who was the State Department guy. He was in the corner. The building was about 40 feet by 30 feet in a rectangle. And so Dave was in this corner over here. Tyrone was over there. I had been over there talking with Tyrone. That's when he kind of conveyed to me the story about Tig saving his life earlier that night. We talked about our kids because he had a baby boy at that time that was, I think, about 9, 10 months old. My little girl was 7 months old. Tig had a set of twins, a boy and a girl that were 2 weeks older than my little girl. All of us there had a lot of young children. And we just kind of got into that conversation about our kids and getting home and that kind of thing, because it was that downtime in the firefight. Because Tyrone had extended, he was supposed to have been gone. He was going to rotate out, but he extended twice for the ambassador's visit because he didn't want somebody coming in that had never been to the city and didn't know it. So he wanted to stay and finish out and do the job so the ambassador had the best protection, and we had the best protection at our place while he was there. And about that time, Bub comes up, and now prior to, kind of goes back to those 6 Ps, we had built ladders to get up and down from the rooftops, because anybody who's been in the Middle East knows there's really 2 types of rooftops. They're either flat or domed. If it's a dome, it's usually a mosque, and traditionally, the houses have a flat rooftop, and there's always about a 3-foot wall around the top, kind of like a barrier. Because traditionally, if that's my house, that culture, my sons are going to go out, they get married, they bring their daughters back, they live with the same family. Instead of building a whole new house, you just build another floor. And the families all live together. So we took 1.5-inch square tubing, cut it up, welded it together, and then bolted it to the walls so we could get up and down. Well, Glenn comes up, and he comes over to where me and Ty are, and Ty introduces him to me, and I had said, hey, it's great to have another gunfighter up here. It's been quiet since about 1:30, 2 o'clock, so we're thinking, hey, maybe it's over. Maybe they've pulled back. Glenn steps across and starts talking to Ty, and it's that time of morning, if you look off into the east, it's pitch black, but then right along the horizon, you see that band of light blue. A little bit up, it gets darker and darker, and still it's pitch black. The sun's getting ready to come up. Military, that it's beginning morning nautical twilight. It's at 30 minutes, 45 minutes before the sun actually comes over the horizon. That is the time that, hey, the cowboys and Indians, that's when you attack, right? Historically, attacks come BMNT or evening nautical twilight. It's that hour after the sun goes down, because the light, as it's changing with the night, changes how you see things, changes how your eyes perceive shadows. you can start seeing silhouettes. And I kind of turn over to the guys, and I'm like, if the attack's coming, it's going to come here in the next 20, 30 minutes. Well, call for prayer goes off. It's about 5:07, 5:08. Once prayer ends, it was 5:11 when the attack started. They launched an RPG, and it hit the wall right in front of where me and Ty and Glenn were. It was about 30 yards in front of us is our outer wall. They opened up with small arms fire, AK-47s, PKMs, RPKs, and also, almost simultaneously, they had launched a mortar, which hit right in front of where Dave was. But it hit the outer wall. And Dave yells out that he's hit. And as I glance over, in between shooting, I can see him, and he's kneeling on this box that we had built to step up over the wall to get on that ladder. And you can see him, he's holding his head, and he's yelling out that he's hit and that he's hit. And every fiber in your body wants you to go over and help him because your brother's bleeding. You got somebody that's hurt and injured. But you can't because you got to secure the scene first. You got to secure, because if I pull out of there and go help him, that's one less gun in the gunfight, which leaves the ability of the enemy to take over that position, and everybody dies. So as much as we call it self-aid first, you got to take care of yourself. You got to train yourself to take care of yourself. How many of you have medical kits in your cars? How many of them, if you got trapped in your car and if you went off the road and got trapped, can reach it? Most of them are in the trunk, right? Most everybody. What good does a medical kit do you in the trunk? It doesn't. It's great that I can use that to help somebody else, but I got to be able to help myself first. In every vehicle I own, there's 3 tourniquets within arm's reach. Okay? Yeah, I'm paranoid because I almost had my arm blown off. Who cares, right? But if you get trapped somewhere and you can't stop the bleeding, how long does it take for a person to bleed out? You got what? I think 7 or 8 quarts of blood or something like that. Takes about 3-4 minutes if that long, if you hit a major artery. Well, the only way to stop that and save yourself is a tourniquet. If nothing else out of this, make sure you have a med kit where you can get to it. So that's my thought, is I was going to go over and help him, but no, I got to stay there. And I'm shooting. I go through a magazine. I kneel down, change mags, and as I'm coming back up, that's when the next mortar hits. And it hit about 15 feet to my right. And when that one hit, it kind of knocked me back. And as I stand back up to shoot, that's when I noticed that Ty's in a fetal position at my feet. And he'd been shooting a belt-fed machine gun, and that thing's gone. Now that's another gun out of the fight. So I bring my gun up to shoot, and that's when I realize that I'm injured, because I bring up my left arm to grab my gun, and about 6 inches above the wrist, it's kind of hanging off at a 90-degree angle. Now, adrenaline is a hell of a drug. Okay, and that sheer will to survive and keep going. In my mind, another gun's out of the fight. I've got to stay in the fight. I'm swinging my arm up, trying to make it work, trying to make it grab while I'm trying to shoot. And that's when the next mortar hits. It hit about 7 feet short in the same area as the first one on the rooftop. And that one, I glanced over my shoulder and I saw Glenn go face down on the rooftop. Now he's out of the fight. So I turned back again to try to shoot. And that's when the third one hit. And when the third one hit, that's when the first time I felt pain. And it felt like I got stung by 1,000 bees. And at that point, that stubborn, hard-headed jarhead in me said, you better get to some cover, because if another one comes, it's your turn. So I kind of dove down, and everything went quiet. Got to the ground, and everything's quiet. I could hear, all I could see was dust and debris coming down. Well, I sat up, pulled a tourniquet out because I needed to get something on my arm, but I got distracted because I knew Ty was there. And I looked over and I saw Ty, so I started crawling over to Ty to see if I could find a pulse on him. Couldn't find it. So I sat back up, and that's when I see a shadow come up over the rooftop, and it was Tig. He's the first one to come up over, and he runs into Dave. Now, Dave, his arm was almost severed off from the mortar blast as well, but then about 6 inches above his ankle, his left leg was almost severed off. Tig got 2 tourniquets put on him, saving his life. And then he comes over to me. Now, Tig, when he tells the story, he says he came over to me because he heard some crying. I was there. Hey, I was there. It didn't happen. I'm telling you, it didn't happen. None of it did, okay? So he's a liar, so don't trust him, okay? So he's walking over to me, and I was thinking of my tourniquet, and I'm trying to get my arm I lift my arm up, and I'd hold it in place and try to make it stay there. Then I'd go to grab my tourniquet, and it would fall down, and I just couldn't. I was back and forth doing that, and he walks up, he says, hey, you might want to quit playing with that. You're not going to make it any better, right? He grabs my tourniquet, gets it put on, and stands me up, and he says, hey, can you make it over to the ladder on your own? Everybody here knows that you don't volunteer for anything, right? I did. I'm like, sure, I can get over there. Because I knew in the back of my mind, I was still hoping Ty and Glenn is still alive. I didn't think so, but I was still hoping that. And I knew Tig needed to take care of them. I get over to the ladder, and the next guy comes up on top of the rooftop to help out. And he's like, hey, can you get down on your own? Again, hard-headed Marine. I'm like, sure, I can do that. I'm tough. And they help me sit on the ledge, and the ladder's right here. And about that time is when reality comes into effect. And I'm sitting there looking down. See, now I don't mind if I go out with a pile of brass around my feet and a bunch of dead guys trying to kill Americans out in the field. I mean, that's okay. That's the life I choose. But the last thing I want my kids to read is in my obituary says, survived gunfights, survived explosions, fell off roof, broke neck. Ain't going out that way, not this guy, right? No. So I'm sitting there thinking, how do I get off this roof? And I'm like, okay, if I just lean down and I hook my good arm around that top rung of the ladder and I slide off, I mean, physics, right? Gravity, I'm going to go down, my body's going to turn, and I'm going to land on the ladder. I can just walk my way down and get off, right? Well, Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. Luckily, I hooked that good arm, but as I'm sliding, I'm thinking everything's going great. And then one foot goes through one hole in the ladder, and the other foot goes through the other hole, and I fall about halfway down the ladder, catching myself. End up pulling myself back up, walk around. Another guy meets me up. He walks me in and lays me down on the floor. Well, when I'm laying on the floor and sitting there, there was four of the agency guys sitting there just shining flashlights on me. Nobody's doing nothing. And I'm like, hey, somebody needs to get my clothes off because I know I'm bleeding from more than just my arm. I mean, I just got 3 81 millimeter mortars. An 81 millimeter mortar has a kill radius of 22 feet, which means if you're within 22 feet of it, you've got a 98% chance of dying. I was in 15 feet of 3 of them. Like I said, there was another person there helping out that night. Well, the female case officer, she runs to the med room and says, here, I'll get the medical shears. And I hear her throwing through stuff, and she yells out, Oz, where are they at? And I'm like, hey, first set of shelves, third from the top. And the reason goes back to that, I'm kind of OCD. When I set up a med room or something, I take a water bottle and I cut the top off and I tape it to something right by where the gurney is or where the rest of the supplies are. Certain things go in there, morphine and medical shears. The 3 things I know that I need all times to save my life is my gun, my ammos, and my med equipment. Everything after that, especially in a war zone, is superfluous. So I've got to know where those things are at all times. I yell out where they're at. She comes running back. Well, in the meantime, the deputy chief of base pulls out a buck knife, right? About a 5-inch blade on it. He says, here, I'll cut your clothes off. And he's shaking like a dog crapping a peach seed. And I'm sitting there going back through that thing. Survived mortar attack, all of this. Obituary says, got killed by the guy that was trying to cut his clothes off because he was shaking so bad he stabbed him. I talked him into putting his knife away. They end up getting my clothes cut off. We end up finding about 25 holes. Most of them weren't too bad. I got hit in the neck, chest 4 times. Femoral artery, didn't hit the femoral artery, but pretty close. And then a bunch of little things up and down both arms and legs, a few in my face. But we got all the major ones stopped. Got Dave down off the roof and made it to the airport. We got out to the airport, and I rode in the back of a pickup truck on a stretcher. And they pulled up to the airport, and they were going to, one of the guys comes over, and they were going to grab the stretcher. And I knew I could walk, so I'm kind of like brushed him aside. I says, I walked into Benghazi. I'm going to walk out. And I stood up and started walking to the plane. And there's a flight attendant, a female flight attendant, an Arab lady, had her shabab on, and her eyes were about the size of saucer plates. And I'm not sure if that's because I was bleeding so bad or it's the first time she ever saw a white guy naked. Because remember, they cut all my clothes off, right? She disappears into the back of the airplane, and I'm like, okay, I guess I look really bad naked. So I climb up the stairs and I get there, and she's coming back to the front with a handful of towels. And I'm thinking she's wanting me to put one around me. So I reach out to grab it, and she stopped about 5 feet in front of me and started laying them down. Now this woman had a job to do. She was hired to take care of the plane. Her job was to make sure I didn't bleed on her boss's carpet. She laid towels down, and I'm like, I just walked past her. You think I'm bad? Wait till we bring Dave on. Because Dave was bleeding. I mean, he had lost consciousness. He was in and out a lot. Well, that's how we got out of there. We got everybody loaded up and headed back to Tripoli. And then the rest of the shooters, Ty and Glenn and the rest of our team and the GRS team from Tripoli, had to wait. I wasn't sure how they were going to get out of there. All of a sudden, we'd sent a source to get the ambassador's body. We retrieved that, brought it back to the airport. A C-130 lands, and we're thinking, okay, great. They finally got an aircraft there, right? Well, it comes up, takes a right turn, and there's a big Libyan flag on the tail fin. It wasn't one of ours. Well, luckily, they still had that big bag of money, so a couple guys went over, talked to the pilot and the co-pilot, and convinced them that it was in their financial benefit to fly out of Benghazi. So we got everybody loaded up, got out of Benghazi, and the way we come up with the name for the movie was 13 hours, because it started about 9:30, 9:40, depends on who's watch. And the last guy got out of Benghazi 13 hours later with the ambassador's body. We didn't leave anybody behind. We took care of our own, and we didn't depend on anything else. You got to do that if you're in that kind of situation. It comes down to leadership, comes down to trust to your people, to your left and right, and knowing what you can do and knowing your limits. And I got to thank you all so much for inviting me here to speak. God bless you all. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your service to our country. God bless.